second part of our weaving activity is to start putting our weft yarns onto our loom, and we're going to start off with a plain weave, which is the simplest of weaves. In this one, the weft yarn goes up and under, up and under, up and under every single warp yarn. When we look at our weave diagrams, it looks like a little checkerboard. And in our weave diagram, any square that's filled in means that our warp yarn is up, or it's on top. If we think about, these warp lines here, all that means is that this first one here, our warp yarn is up. So this first weft yarn would go under and then over, under, over, under, over, under. So I'll show you what that looks like on your loom. I brought a variety of yarns with me. If you have bulkier yarns, those yarns will help your weave come together a little bit quicker. Here's a really bulky yarn. It's also a fancy yarn. We talked about fancy yarns in classes. Here's another type of fancy yarn here. It's got a little bit different twist to it. It's got different colors in it, so that'll give you an interesting texture and variety of color. This green yarn's kind of a mid-sized yarn, which is nice. If you choose to go a really thin yarn, this one, which is a bamboo cotton, it'll take a little bit longer to get your weave finished up, but you'll have a much smoother surface at the end of it. So you'll want to have a variety of yarns before you get started. Pick those out. For your actual assignment for your wall hanging, I'd like to see if you do go with some really bulky yarns like one of these, or you choose to use, I didn't talk about roving, some roving in it. I want to see you use still some mid-weight yarns to give you some variety and thickness and to kind of give you a little extra practice with the actual weave itself. So I'm going to start off with this yarn here. It's a pretty thick yarn, and we're going to get our weave started. So you'll need your shed stick, and you can use your shuttle if you want to. If you choose to use your shuttle, just put your yarn here through the notches, and then you can kind of wind it up. And this just helps you push it through a little bit easier. Or if you want to, usually what I do is I just make a little bundle of my own where I wrap it around my fingers a few times. Kind of wrap it this way. I've got a little bundle to push through. Okay, so when I showed you the weave diagram, our first warp yarn is up, and then it goes under, up, under, up, under. So we'll start with our first one up. You're going to take your shed stick, and you're going to put it underneath your warp yarn. So now you see your warp yarn, your first one is up. And then what you're going to do is you're going to alternate every other yarn. One's up, one's down, one up, one down, up, down, until you get to the end. And then you're going to push your shed stick so that it's standing up. If your loom's a little taut with your warp yarns, it'll just be a little bit of a struggle to get it pushed up, but then once you do, you'll have a nice little area here to push your weft yarn through. So you'll want to go ahead, take your weft yarn, push it all the way through. I leave my tail hanging, especially with a bulky yarn here at the beginning, and at the very end when we're done with our wall hanging, we can go ahead and we can tuck it in or kind of tie it off, but I usually let that first one hang out the side. You'll put your shed stick down, and then I use my shed stick like a comb where I push it up to the top. But if you do have a kit and it comes with a comb, you can also use your comb to push it up to the top or to the bottom. So now, when we look at our weave diagram, we go to our next row, and in this one, the warp is down and the weft is up. So what that means is that when we take this out, this first warp yarn is under, which means we put our shed stick over top of it. And now our second warp yarn is up. And so you alternate again. Push your shed stick up. Go ahead and take your weft yarn and you want to push it through again. Just make sure it's not too loose here at the bottom, but it's also not too tight so that it's pulling your warp yarn in. You want to get a nice kind of medium tension. Push this down, go up, and then we alternate again. So now this time our warp yarn's up. So you have our shed go underneath and alternate back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This plain weave is really simple. It's kind of methodic, which is nice. Once you get the hang of it, you can usually get going pretty quickly. And when you use one of these bulkier yarns, you'll see it come together pretty quick. And now you can start to see our plain weave come together, where you've kind of got every single one up and under. So the other thing you can do before you switch over to your next weave, which for us will be the twill, is you can either keep going back and forth all the way to the edge, or you could go part of the way and start to make a shape out of it. So let me show you what I mean by that. Switch our warp yarns here. So when you push your weft yarn through, instead of going all the way to the edge, maybe if you want to make a triangle, you choose to go only this far, right here. So if that's the case, instead of bringing it all the way through, I'm going to let this hang out over top of both of these yarns. Let's pull it through, push it up. So if I want to end on this yarn here, where I let it kind of flow through, this one's up. So that means next time we need to make sure that this yarn is down.